Lord, it is time. The huge summer has gone by. Now overlap the sundials with your shadows, and on the meadows let the wind go free. Command the fruits to swell on tree and vine. Grant them a few more warm, transparent days. Urge them on to fulfillment then, and press the final sweetness into the heavy wine. Whoever has no house now will never have one. Whoever is alone will stay alone, will sit, read, write long letters through the evening, and wander on the boulevards up and down restlessly while the dry leaves are blowing. Rilke, Autumn Day. I was lying in bed last night reading Claire-Louise Bennett's new book, Big Kiss, Bye-Bye, marvelling as ever at how alive the language always feels in her hands, how right it all looks and sounds on the page, the huigan of her sentences, to use that Chinese whole-leaf tea term, that returning flavour or echo of the tea, or in this case, her prose, that becomes perceptible only once you've read it, swallowed it, reached a full stop or the end of a paragraph. When what you thought was over as an experience, that particular configuration of tastes, sense, mouthfeel of the words or the tea, is suddenly there again, like a kind of flavour phantom rising from the back of the throat, easy to miss unless you're focused on it, this magically still present continuation of something good, the secret persistence of a thing that you thought had ended, but is still with you. I was also fantasizing, as I often do when reading CLB, about how wonderful it might be to have a sister or a friend like her, perhaps because I recognize in Claire-Louise the same strange circuitry, the same egoic code or temperamental DNA that seems to animate a creature such as myself. A few days earlier, I'd been rereading her previous books, Pond and Checkout 19, preparing the terrain for this new addition to the CLB canon, her third book in its handsome Yves Klein blue Fitzcarraldo edition, oh so Gallimard, oh so Einaudi, completing what feels like a kind of literary triptych, a mature three-course distillation of Claire-Louise's narrative essence. In my mind, I prefer to call Claire-Louise Bennett CLB rather than Claire-Louise Bennett or even Claire-Louise. CLB because the full name sounds a touch poncy and proper to my ears. What kind of person gives their kid a double-barreled forename, Claire-Louise, when, double-barrel surnames are already ugly, clunky, and socially overdetermined? Claire-Louise, I gather from interviews and the like, really isn't in any way poncy or pretentious, which is confusing to me as she's saddled with a name that feels faintly aristocratic, shall we say, to my peasant sensibilities, the sort of name you might expect to find in the society pages of this here island, a minor royal perhaps, someone adjacent to the already adjacents, a distant cousin of Beatrice and Eugenie, Andrew's regrettable and no doubt now quite regretful daughters. Lying in bed reading this short, wonderful new addition to the CLB canon, I was suddenly struck by a solution to the problem of my YouTube project that had been bedeviling me in increasingly obvious ways over the past year. The problem, as far as I can tell, is one of shame. In filming myself, talking, presenting, addressing some imagined viewer who might, in time, I had hoped, reveal themselves if they liked what they saw and heard, had I not simply recreated for myself the conditions of my first years on this island, all those years of being the misplaced foreigner, wearing the wrong clothes, speaking with the wrong accent, failing again and again to make myself lovable or even just likable to my peers, as I once had with my own kind. Yes, I've always been shy, always an introvert, but it turns out even with these defects, I had to wait 14 years to learn what it feels like to be the repelled and repellent outsider, the stranger. And however hard I've tried since, therapy, self-inquiry, new cities, altered circumstances and states, the supposed detachment and composure of age, I've never quite managed to shake off that teenage self who lives with me still. Then, as now, I have what human animals seem to consider the wrong sensibility, something a little off, a little too oblique, perhaps, or overtuned, an orientation that draws no one to me except in the professional capacity of psychotherapist, paid confidant. That early And yet somehow, in the last year, I have once more turned myself, for the sake of a generalized you, a YouTuber, public ear and eye, into this content-making, grinning, gurning, prancing, poncing buffoon whose every video frame only signaled my somewhat desperate desire and need to make friends, which is to say, find and be in contact with some souls similar to my own. It hasn't worked. It won't work because I don't have the means to make it work. Reading CLB and before her Franzen's Crossroads, both, writers of exquisite sentences, although in very different ways, I suddenly remembered, though, that the soul can also be allowed to speak as it is speaking now, as it perhaps speaks through the mouths of all those human beings I connect intimately and deeply with each week in my somewhat professional capacity, encouraging them to share their selfish but also soul-ish content with me in what we both refer to as their therapy sessions, wherein I am paid as much to keep quiet for an hour as to speak. I struggle with that requirement. The human voice, or the words it leaves behind on the page, is, I believe, the closest we will ever get to experiencing the soul, our own or that of another, or at least what I now understand by that term, whereas the human face and form, the human image, is perhaps no more than a billboard for one's socio-economic position, one's internalized class codes and aesthetic conditioning, one's mating displays and tribal affiliations, all of it performed through gesture, posture, and the semiotics of dress and self-stylized comportment. Instagram is no more than this, and it seems to corrupt my soul on a daily basis. I think I will leave it alone for a while. YouTube, similarly, But I am able on here at least to engage with long-form interviews and encounters where image is sometimes forgotten in the desire to connect meaningfully with another person. Maybe, like you, I mainly watch people talking to other people on YouTube. This is where I go, here is where I come, here is where I come. This is where I go to feel part of the human race, to listen in on our human conversation, where my presence won't be judged or found wanting. Image of ourselves, others, status and belonging is, as we know, absolutely everything in the screen-based world. But it was equally the case before. It was and has always been the be-all and end-all, and I have allowed myself to get caught up in that theatre of self-display for a year or so now, and it has fucked me up. It has regularly and royally fucked me up, which is to say, fucked up my soul. But that's cool, because suddenly, one night, you're reading Claire-Louise Bennett, and you realize there are ways to be unfucked up, ways to unfuck up one's soul, while still staying true to that weird, egoic DNA that we share. Ways such as what, you ask? Well, maybe write another unplugged, stripped back, unmarketed, unseen, unread book. That's one way to do it, and I've done a few of those. And that's clearly how CLB has remained relatively sane by the look of it in our insane age of ultra-curated, digitally mediated selves. Or maybe I should go back to podcasting, which I'd done for a decade before that, before dipping a toe into YouTube. Podcasts are all about voice, which is to say soul, or at least more so than YouTube, I would argue. The only problem is that I've now formed over the last year a kind of attachment to this platform, and the space that I was going to say had been carved out for myself here, but perhaps it would be more accurate to say the space just outside the playground, but within earshot, that Algo has graciously allowed me to exist in, never denying me a video upload, even though it might take an hour or so to upload, even though it might take an hour or so to do this, always showing my thumbnails to a few passers-by, although strangely, lately, maybe only 1% of my so-called subscribers, about 5 people on average, one of whom might click, but at least one of whom might click, but usually doesn't. At least the messages still seem to be going through to those who regularly check in, who also tend to be the people that I like to check in with, if they are up for that. During this period of making one stupid video after another, I have managed to connect with a few pairs of human ears other than Algo, or Simon, as I once liked to call him, the YouTube recommendation algorithm, the God, the Master, the Curator, the He who shall be obeyed on this platform. And that, connecting with others, has been deeply meaningful to me. I have no real-life friends. I am not particularly skilled at keeping or maintaining friendship, or any other relationships for that matter, even though I have been trying on the friend front very, very hard to do so these last few years, really trying to learn how to stay in contact with other people, how to keep showing up, how to belong without contorting myself into something untrue. But I have failed again and again at this very simple but also very complicated human-animal task. And so once more have more or less, and so have probably more or less resigned myself to, and so once more have resigned myself to having, for the most part, conversations with myself, as well as with those aspects of the human soul that are communicated to all of us whenever we want them in books, films, art. Also, of course, with those who pay me to comment on their content for 15 or so hours a week. I am possibly, indubitably, far too much of an open-closed book, or maybe just, let's face it, too narcissistic to do the same, to pay another to probe my inner world on condition of continued payment, just as I refuse to pay someone to touch my body as a solace or for pleasure, though that too has gone. Just as I refuse to pay someone to touch my body as a solace for me or for pleasure, though that too has gone without human attention, curiosity, tenderness for many years. But this is not just a self-pitying confession, friend. Yes, let's use that term to denote anyone who stays with another's content, be it a therapist, a parasocial inhabitant of YouTube, whoever. Let me address myself, as I am addressing myself, to the friend who does this. Which is to say, our existential predicament is of course timeless, as well as a symptom of our age, and so ultimately, as with all things, it really boils down to how one makes something of one's predicament, whatever that is, rather than how we perceive it. CLB, if she could have spoken to me through the pages of Big Kiss Bye-Bye, although she was saying nothing of this in the text itself, might have communicated something like this in my direction. You and me, Steve, as souls, or whatever else we are very clearly people compelled to translate our aliveness into some kind of aesthetic form. And so, to put it simply, we really do, we have to make sentences, we have to build paragraphs the way another person might construct a pot, a plate, a teacup, or a dry stone wall, with as much patience as we can muster, fitting one irregular thought or expression against another until the gaps between word, sentence, paragraph begin to hold together somehow, until what is slight and fragile, nothing really, some lines on a page, acquires its own tensile strength, so that we can keep on testing whatever it is that language can say or hold, recording not events per se, as in a diary, but rather whatever current of thinking or feeling we are being thought by or felt into through language. Is this fundamentally a losing battle? Of course it is. What is the language using me or you for? I don't know. Have the words ever made anything of you near a kind of truth you thought you were? Me neither. The words, like albatrosses, are only a doubtful touch towards you going, and me lifting my hand to speak, to illustrate and observe catastrophe. What is the weather using us for, where we are ready, with all our language lines aboard? The beginning wind slaps the canvas. Are you ready? Are you ready? I'm not. Or maybe I am, finally. I don't know. We need to trust our threads, don't we? To trust that if I or you, continue to do this, when we continue... We need to trust our threads, don't we? To trust that if I or you continue to do this, when we continue to do this, our path to the jute sack, the grave, the end both of the ego and of any soul essence from which that ego emerged, in its wake might connect with something meaningful, even essential within us, as well as with the ear of God, we might say, the one who hears us when we are unheard, unseen, unspoken to. As I connect with Max, my first reader, or rather listener, my dog, my God, my portal to living essence, for whom I also write these words as if speaking to a son or a daughter that I never had, nor ever will at this point in time. Which is also my rather high-minded way of saying that in the last year, after making such a ridiculous amount of stupid and inconsequential videos, and in the process making of myself stupid and inconsequential, YouTube has, in fact, connected me to God, which is to say, ananke, necessity. As I wrote recently in my piece about Simone Weil, God begins where our consolation ends. God is the fuck you absence at the center of everything, the hollow left after the promise or premise collapses. God is loneliness, betrayal, the silence that follows a plea. God is the friend who drifts away, the lonely self, isolated but also unable to connect. God is the emptiness of the unseen, untouched, unvalued. And to that I might add that God, or rather this place for thought and expression that I call what is the language using me for, is an ongoing, open invitation to speak to and for oneself, or at least this self, or even better, one's soul, as if one were already with God, which is to say, dead, but voicing the aliveness of the not yet dead to that cold, dank earth around us, but also to the beetles burrowing through the soft give of our cheeks, the centipedes and woodlice and nameless pale larvae, feeding on what was once thought to be private, all of them passing us mouth to mouth into the soil again, the clay, the earth, into nutrient, rot, and root. And this, my voicing here, is just of course a premonition of that, but also a staying true to my exiled soul, fulfilling a contract, or more like a deep and abiding friendship we established 4 decades ago with that young soul, with that fulfilling a contract more like a deep and abiding friendship we established 4 decades ago with our own young souls, when solace and connection could only be found in words on the page, the reading of them and the making of them, rather than in the playground. For YouTube is the playground all over again, but this time largely virtual. All the cool kids are here, the interesting kids, the funny kids, the sweet and kooky kids. And then there is you, Steve, in a copse, close enough to the school, to the playground, to hear their laughter, to hear the chatter of those that you can't connect with, you with a book, you with a few sentences to chew on, you with your God. Nothing has changed since then. Nothing has changed since then. Half a lifetime has flown by, but nothing has changed. My soul is still what it was, what it is, and the world is still what it is. But at least I know my thread. I know my soul. There's a thread I follow, you see. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what this I is pursuing, and it has to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While we hold it, we can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and we suffer and get old. Nothing we do can stop time's unfolding. We don't ever let go of the thread. And this once more reminds me of the pleasure it is to re-find one's voice, which is to say this voice here, which is to say my soul. I don't really recognize the voice who spoke in previous videos. That was not mine. That was not now. That was then. My voice, I have discovered this year, cannot be captured in an image. It is only this. And this pleases my voice, my soul, I have discovered this year, cannot be, should not be captured in an image. It is only this. And this pleases me because I am a servant of the word, not of the image. So from now on, the plan is to continue doing what I was doing before, letting the language use me to express whatever it and my soul require on any given day from these quarters, to get up, as I've done today and will do again tomorrow, and, just put one word in front of the next, one stone on top of another, in a bid to make a sentence, to express something of what it feels like to be telling each other alive, about our souls alive, and see what follows from that. I didn't know what I was going to write this morning until I wrote it. But now I have written it, or almost, and tomorrow the same. Why not? But no videography, not even music, as much as I like adding that, other than the voice of my soul, I think, from now on. I imagine God, late at night, lonely and struggling to fall asleep, propping these voicings next to his or her godly pillow, creating the illusion for themselves that there is another there in the dark, a benign other sharing their thoughts and feelings without any emotionally flavoured music or imagery to destroy that illusion. It's how I go to sleep every night, with some kind of audiobook playing, or maybe Speechify reading to me whatever bedtime prose I feed into it. I imagine God feeling loved and cared for in this somewhat anthropomorphic sense. For God, of course, doesn't need our love or care, and nor do we, let's be fair, care for God, if God is all we care. And nor, let's be fair, do we really care for God, even if God is supposedly all we care as human creatures, predominantly for no one but ourselves. But this God, the one I am imagining here, a somewhat needy God, as I am needy, terribly and awfully needy. I imagine this God being spoken to by another living, breathing intelligence, focusing on his or her ears, trying to communicate something gentle, curious, consoling, and perhaps even true, whatever we understand by that slippery term. Truth, as well as my soul, is what I give Max with my presence, I guess, and also what he gives me. In that sense, I already have everything I need on this God-forsaken earth to make life, my life anyway, worth living. Now I just need to keep following this blood-bright thread. Look how pretty it is, the words spilling out behind me here on the screen, emerging as they do visually in dots and dashes, this thread of my soul's voicing, falling as it does here, there, anywhere, from the nothing, falling as it does here, between the nothing that was and the nothing to come. Only this now. Only this. Another hard one understanding I've had in the last year about my creative, which is to say my soul practice, is that these words, like freshly baked croissants or bread, are only truly alive to me, and perhaps to you too, when they are relatively fresh, straight out of the inner oven, we might say. By tomorrow, everything the self has written here in its attempt to put its soul into language will be once more pumpkins and mice, ashes and tatters, which is very frustrating if you're trying to create a beautiful drywall structure that might serve some purpose other than to prop up our ever unstable egoic selves or shells. Our ever unstable egoic selves. Recently, I've been returning to albums of music I recorded in my 20s, novels mostly written then, as well as later book-length prose projects, and although I recognize a core self and that self's themes therein, as well as a certain linguistic deftness in the novels and poetry in terms of translating that self or soul into prose or verse, it does feel a little bit like disinterring a dead body or various dead bodies, because for me anyway, the only thing that is really alive, really alive, really real and present and now is this sentence right here, this one I am writing, this one which will know, this one here, which I will no doubt fiddle around with during the day before releasing it later, before speaking it, as I'm trying to do, directly into the ear of God. I don't ever want to give God bad sentences. There are enough of those around, right? Tomorrow, though, this sentence and all the utterances that accompany it will be just one more corpse, another video, another book, another album track fed into the virtual maw of the internet and lost forever. Never our virtual offerings tomorrow, this sentence and all the utterances it accompanies will be, unfortunately, just another corpse, another video, another book or album track fed into the virtual maw of the internet and lost forever. Never a beautiful drywall cathedral, these collected utterances, but more like a bunch of misshapen stones betokening nothing of great worth, and yet holding, hopefully, in some way in each stony entity, something of a soul, my soul, even though I don't think one has full possession of it, which even though I don't think one really has any possession of it, although in a fractal way you might say, at least and maybe each of these stones, each iteration, a small shard of that great Sisyphean project we call life, hunkering down as we hunker down and prepare to push our duties, desires and delusions once more up the hill. I know all of this now, which is also a kind of freedom of sorts, if you think about it. If we can at least sign off on today's words, today's thoughts and feelings, knowing that tomorrow they will probably no longer be alive in us, at least not in the same way, for better or for worse, then we can perhaps celebrate whatever comes, whatever we were today, this slice of bread, this cup of tea, real, this slice of bread, this cup of tea, and maybe then everything that follows, everything that fades, is just part of this, right? This small proof that we were, for a moment, saying something. That we were, for a moment, here. And that someone, somewhere, God, I would argue, being our safest bet on this front, is also holding us fondly in mind. Is holding us fondly in mind.